Welcome to the TRG podcast, everyone. This is the podcast where we discuss all matters of relationships that people are suffering from. Welcome back to the TRG podcast, everyone. My name is TRG, the Relationship Guru, and on today's episode number 6, we're going to be talking about rejection and failure. If you haven't already checked us out on YouTube, please check us out there. Also, you can download us on Spotify, Amazon Music, and iTunes. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the topic. So Patrick, welcome back to the conversation. Good to have you back. It's been a couple weeks, I think, for the audience since they last seen you.
Thank you for having me back, man. I'm always happy to be here. And, there's all sorts of topics that we always talk about, and they are so fruitful and so full of energy and all these experiences that we've had. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So, like today's topic, I think that hits pretty close to home. I know for sure for myself, probably for you as well, I'm assuming. One of the things that I think is important, I touched on this topic, and I think we touched on this topic in prior videos about obviously me starting the YouTube channel and stuff like that. But rejection and failure, or I guess being scared to fail, has so much power over us that it really prevents us from achieving some of our goals. And this could go on for years and years at a time. I'd like to hear, I guess, maybe just start off with what your definition, I guess, of rejection or failure is. Like, what does that mean to you?
Totally. I think for starters, I see two different concepts. Rejection for me is when any entity or person or organization does not want to deal with you anymore. Mm-hmm. So they do not give you the attention or the resources that you are looking for. Mm-hmm. So then the topic of failure would be like the consequences of that rejection, right? If we dive deeper, there's many different ways that we can describe this, but in a general perspective, I think that's what it entails. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I couldn't agree more. I think that a lot of times rejection, we associate that maybe with like dating or like a person. I think that can come in many forms, not just for job searching, for promotions, rejecting an idea at work. It really comes in all kinds of facets, and it's all relative to the particular person's situation, but it's also how we learn to kind of deal with that. Do you please talk about whatever you feel comfortable with talking about, Patrick, but obviously, me knowing you have some familiarity with rejection and failure, and maybe like being scared to fail. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Let's be open about this. I think that everybody, throughout their development and their growth, we all face rejection and failure at some point, right? So I consider that I have faced that multiple times on multiple occasions, sometimes because it was meant to be that way, sometimes because I caused it, and sometimes because somebody else wanted to do the deed and pretty much just block me, right? So more recently, as you may know, I did face a big failure, pretty much the biggest one of my life. At the same time, obviously, there's also a good point in this that I pretty much faced the biggest professional growth that I had ever experienced, right? So there's an equilibrium in there, but obviously it really does depend on what you want to give more weight, right? Or more value in this equation, right? So if we go a little bit deeper, speaking openly, the rejection or the failure that I faced was being let go from my former job, right?
Mhm.
So it's been rough, like coming to terms with uh, pretty much first understanding what happened and what led to that point,
Mhm.
and then obviously what are the next sets of steps that I have to take in order to get back on my feet, right?
Mhm.
So uh, it really is a world in and of itself. So we can dive deeper in a moment, of course.
Awesome. And I mean, just talking to you right now, and I think listeners would might not know this, but you're still dealing with this. Obviously, you're still dealing with some of the ramifications from all of this. Of course, is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. There's personal issues and obviously as well as job issues that are currently ongoing and developing. So I consider that regardless of, uh, I mean, where I am at today,
Mhm.
uh, there's all this background that has led me to this point, right?
Mhm.
So again, it's a set of steps and decisions that you go through that get you to this point, pretty much. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Would you, I guess, in your professional and personal opinion, do you feel like rejection and failure kind of comes out of nowhere, or is it like, you might have laid down some of the groundwork to get to that point? Like like it's slowly inclining to the climax where that happens. It's not just kind of out of the blue, like a fluke.
It's a really good question. This
Mhm.
actually ties down a lot with what we spoke about on previous episodes about
Mhm.
darkness, about obviously going down the road and not being able to stop, right?
Mhm.
Or trying to pick yourself back up, and then since you're going downhill, well, you lose your feet, you're footing again, and then
Mhm.
you start rolling downhill again. So uh, it's an analogy, of course, but in my opinion, there's always a reason behind uh, first rejection and then failure, right?
Mhm.
There is always genesis for it, and more than likely it is because of something or some things that you did or did not do, depending on the situation, right?
Mhm.
Um, I remember this one time that, whoa, pretty much, I didn't report an issue back on one of the companies that I worked for.
Mhm.
And I knew, I was well aware that I had to do it, but I didn't do it because I had so many things going on at the moment.
Mhm.
Well, long story short, that actually became a risk event. A risk
Mhm.
event is pretty much something that means that the company is burning at the moment and
Yeah.
everything's on fire, right? So that happened, and that was all on me.
Mhm.
And the consequences of it were both this rejection and feeling of failure. And then it's even more important when, or more heavy on you when people tell you that you are failing, whether it is your peers or your direct managers or other people at the company that you work for, right? So yeah.
Interesting. Would you, I mean, you talked about how you felt from the aftermath of that, but then you also mentioned that kind of what led you up to that was just being too busy and kind of overwhelmed. Um, would you say that that was like partly your responsibility, but also partly the company's responsibility to kind of act accordingly and get you like the help that you needed?
It's always a team effort, in my opinion, right?
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, like in any partnership or relationship, communication is key in order to succeed, right?
Hmm.
If I knew that I was a little bit at capacity or over capacity at that moment, um, I should have reached out to either my peers, my direct manager, and asked for help, right?
Hmm.
The problem, this was back in 2018, by the way.
Hmm.
I had my fair share of experience already,
Hmm.
but I was not as tenured when it comes to time management systems and
Right.
all sorts of time allocation, right? So my point is that I didn't know how to be as transparent as I should have been because I was that's the point. I was scared of being rejected because I was not able to properly manage my time, right?
Right.
So it's a vicious circle, in my opinion, that if you do not break out of, it just repeats. And it has happened to me on multiple occasions. So I'm not saying that I'm perfect and that I have it nailed down already, but yes, it really does come to this fact that if you are not communicating, not being transparent about your needs, the things that are happening on your life at the moment, whether personal or professional, then chances are that you are setting yourself up for either rejection or failure. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. I think you talk about something that's very interesting about time management, and I know that for some listeners at home, they might think, "Oh, well, that's a given. You know, that's super easy." I mean, I would caution people to say that it's super easy. It might be super easy for some people that are very organized and that's really in their blood and they've always been like that. For some people, it's actually a very difficult task. And the reason why I say that is a lot of times time management isn't really in our hands. If you think about it, at least from when you're a child all the way up to basically like university and like after university, you're told what your schedule is. I really don't know how elementary and high school are like in Mexico. I'm assuming that you get a schedule about what classes, you know, what time you're supposed to go to your math class, what time you're supposed to go to biology, chemistry, physics, what time you're supposed to go to PE, recess, lunch, and then what time ultimately you're off school or go to music lessons or whatever. So
Yeah.
your time is almost predetermined by someone else and their scheduling mechanics, right? Whether it's an algorithm or whatever that might be. Same thing carries over to university, really, when you take English 101, Econ 101. It's a specific block of time that you're supposed to adhere to. So you're never, and then beyond that, I think your home life, you're told by your parents when you need to eat, when you need to go to bed, when you need to study for school. Like all these things kind of accumulate. So I'm not absolving anyone of that responsibility because I think we all need to own that at some point when we're adults. But I also have to give a little bit of sympathy and empathy to people in general, because if you took someone that was a toddler, like let's say we were equating kind of experience in time management to your age, you're basically plopping a toddler into like a jungle zone, right? Like a war zone, and telling them, okay, just do time management right now, you know? Like organize your entire life, organize your entire day, like go. And it's like, I don't know what to do. Like people have been telling me to turn left and right my entire life, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Some people actually do get it just naturally, like by doing the things or the tasks that they have to do. They find out that whatever they did and the way that they did it fits the requirements, and then boom, they just have their activities already allocated, and then they don't have to think about it, right? But it also just happens that now that a lot of people are transitioning over to working remotely or working from home, they are finding that it's super hard that I mean to keep up with whatever they have to do, right? Because I mean sometimes there's not a manager like right behind you or chasing you and micromanaging you. So just like your example, right? I mean, when you're younger, when you go to your home, your parents are gonna tell you like it's time to eat, it's time to go to bed, and blah blah blah, right? So Same thing happens when you reach a point of um, I mean, becoming fully functional and independent,
Mm-hmm.
and you move on to the workforce or to the working environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And obviously, you have to adapt. You have to find your way around, and it's super hard at the beginning. Some people actually do get like the education, or they take the classes in order to learn how to manage time. But for those of us that didn't, well, we have to find it out the harder way, which is, well, first through failure, and then through research and feedback, of course, from your direct managers.
Mm-hmm. I think it's always a tricky thing. Obviously, we all have to grow up at some point and take some ownership of that onto ourselves, because that's just not going to happen. Remote working has obviously thrown some things kind of out of whack. People realizing that there's no one breathing over my shoulder to tell me what to do, but they're still expecting the end product to really, be kind of tied in a nice bow, at the end of the day, right? So how do you get from point A to point Z? Like you have to kind of navigate that yourself, essentially. I think time management is obviously a very useful skill. It's a very important one. It's something that I personally work at every day, or I try to. I think over the last 2 years, I've learned more about impactful tasks that maybe only I can do within the company, or even in my everyday life, and kind of leveraging high impact tasks over low impact tasks. I know that's kind of it's a weird concept to a lot of people, like, especially if you start at an entry level position, you might be told what to do, every hour, like that you're doing it, right? Okay, go stack these things, go push this cart, go stock this, go do that. But I think as you get up the chain in any corporation, you're going to have to take a lot more initiative upon yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And now that I have been working for quite a few years, the remote side of the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, and I have to admit that after all these years, I really have become good at time management.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to propose a question to you, because we're talking a lot about time management, and I mean the premise is rejection, right?
Yeah.
So what happens when you do not come through with whatever you were expected to do, right? Um, well, as for myself, I have seen that firsthand multiple times and multiple occasions. There's a saying here that goes a little bit like, I quote, "We like to learn the hard way," pretty much, right? So I'm quoting there. And I don't think that I like that personally, but it just so happens that I am a person that likes to jump into action and into challenges and learn from those challenges and from the mistakes that I make along the way, right? So usually what I have found is that, well, there's many misconceptions, of course, when you are not prepared, when you are not well trained, even, right? Or you have not researched the topic at hand. Chances are you're gonna commit a mistake or multiple mistakes, right? So that has happened to me in the past. Thankfully, there's always been, an area of opportunity in there, and I have been able to grow from those experiences, right? But yeah, I wanted to propose that question to you.
Well, I guess what happens when those things fall apart? I mean, I suppose it really depends on who your boss is and what exactly is the severity of, the thing that you're working on. If it was something that was mission critical, then people are obviously going to be pretty upset, because they're probably depending on you to finish that one task so that they can fulfill some other tasks. And in some respects, you really don't have anyone to blame but yourself if you haven't finished that task, because hopefully you were given the appropriate allotted time to be able to do that, and you just didn't because you just didn't have enough time management. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes people are unreasonable with their requests and they say, hey, get it done by next week, and you're like, oh, it's a 3-month project kind of thing.
Right.
Sorry,
please go ahead. No, please go ahead.
What I was gonna say is, it's imperative that you, as a worker or someone that's tasked with something, inform someone of the realistic expectations of that task, right? They're not always going to 100% agree with you, but that is kind of your job, even just to cover your butt, if you will. Hey, I need help with this. Like, I actually don't understand these and these things, but I understand these things. So I need someone to teach me this in order for me to fulfill that, right? But if you don't voice your opinion on those things and you just try to push through, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure anyways.
Definitely. And this ties down to the topic of transparency and honesty, of course, right? Mm-hmm. If we're not being open and, well, we are not accepting our abilities and our capabilities, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this actually does become a problem, and obviously later down the line, when it comes to the point that, well, you have to deliver the task, or it's the deadline, right? You're probably not going to have as much of an expected result as you may think, right? Obviously, aligning expectations is something super important as well, that goes alongside being open and transparent. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just I think just genuinely asking for help, like a simple thing as much as that. I think people get very embarrassed at times. Like, people get very like, I don't want to bother my boss, like I don't want to seem incapable, like, you know, just a million things, thoughts go through your head, right? Because you just don't want to get rejected and you don't want to be seen as a failure. So instead of asking for help and confronting the issue right away, you just try to skirt around it as much as humanly possible. But like anything else, it just becomes a bigger and bigger problem until it's unmanageable, or you can't really put a lid on it sometimes. So I think that's really important to, I think you and I both know people that just, they pride themselves on not asking for help when clearly they need it. And sometimes that's their downfall, to be honest.
Yeah, we all do. And you're touching a really important point here. And let me just give you a little bit of an overview of my side of the story, right? So, you know, I actually pride myself being someone who works as a team player, right?
Yeah.
I usually try to find the strengths of my teams, and obviously my peers, and the people that I work with on an everyday basis, right? So there's multiple methodologies that I utilize in order to find that out. Once I have that, I can pretty much just relocate the team and utilize the resources as best as I can, right? So it just so happens that sometimes I have been the entirely opposite of that. Right? And I wonder what leads me to these situations. It's not that I don't trust the team. It's not that I don't think they can come through. But it's possibly because I think that I can do a better job. But that might be a misconception again, right?
I think it's a great thing to have confidence in yourself and confidence that you can do a better job than, you know, people that you might rely on to do those things. But I also think that we talked about responsibility as an employee towards a manager, right?
Right.
Now I think we really need to transition to talk about the responsibility of a manager towards an employee. It's a two-way street. So to be completely frank with you, I hate to admit it, but this is true. If my team does not meet targets, I share some of that responsibility. You know, hey, maybe I'm not the one on the actual sales calls, but I am coaching them. I am making sure they're doing their jobs, or maybe they're not doing their jobs, or maybe they're not following up with customers as frequently as they should be, or they're telling me to. Perhaps I'm not giving them as much feedback as I should be. And kind of to answer your question, even if I know in the heart of hearts, yes, I'm probably one of the top salespeople if you just put me on the sales floor, which is why I'm in the position I am today. I can't possibly do all the sales calls. I just can't. You know, I think that has to be a reality for a lot of high performers. They get into this mode where they're like, I can do everything, I can do everything, I can do everything. But the reality of this is you only have 24 hours in a day. You're only one person. Max, maybe you can work 12 to 14 hours or something like that on a project. And if a demo call takes you half an hour to an hour, well, how many calls can you actually attend to, right? Does that make sense? That's just a sales example, but you can extrapolate that to, you know, everything.
Yes, it does apply to multiple things and multiple scenarios and disciplines. It's all about the capacity that you have and this time that you have at your disposal throughout the a regular day, right? Usually you will find that you have anywhere between 6 to 14 hours, like you said, which is a little bit on the extreme side of things. But unfortunately, there's many workers that go through that sort of schedules, right? I would really like to know, like, where do you want to head forward with this, right? So there's multiple things that we can talk about moving forward, like what are the consequences of working too much, working too little, right? Or maybe just guide me a little bit on this one.
Sure. Well, I think the one thing that I wanted to add, well, I guess first and foremost, to answer your question, I think we should head back into failure and rejection, but maybe more so on the personal side and how that affects people and prevents you from losing your inhibitions to follow some of your dreams and stuff like that. I think that's important. The one thing that I wanted to leave listeners off with, just regarding kind of like high expectations and everything like that as a manager, it's great to have high expectations. You should strive for that, and you should strive your team to meet those standards if they are obviously realistic. But if your mentality is like, I can do a better job, so why don't I just do it myself? Yes, that is something that everyone faces, but you have to recognize that part of your job is to actually illustrate that to your team. So if they're not adhering to the same standards that you've placed yourself, they need to know that, and they need to know why and how to get there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I think that's important for everyone to internalize, because it's not always, you know what, like, F it, I'm just going to do it myself because it's going to be 10 times faster. Yes, you may be able to band-aid it for that time, but what about the 14 other tasks that this person needs to do? You need to make sure that they have the capabilities and the tools to be able to do it at that standard. And if they cannot, then they might not be right for the job as well. They might not be the right fit. Maybe that's not their department. Maybe they're just not enthused by it. Could be a multitude of reasons. But I think that's really important for people to understand.
I agree with that. You know, if we touch on the example of the factory, you know, a factory usually just follows a blueprint, right? And there's a set of steps that are quantifiable, and you can measure the quality as well on those steps and the output of said ones, right? So when you are managing a team, in my opinion, it really does fall down to how well you're able to distribute rather than how well you are able to do the things that you want to distribute. You obviously will have to get your hands dirty sometimes, yes, but that's not the main purpose of your position, of course. you're more of an enabler than a doer, in my opinion, right? So I guess I just wanted to give that point, just so there are no misconceptions on with our listeners or viewers as well. So yeah, I have faced these situations multiple times when people either below or above myself really do expect me to do everything, right? So it really does come down to this point of delegating responsibilities, right? And making sure that you are distributing things according to, well, your time, the things that you have at your disposal, the things that you are obviously distributing according to the needs of the company or the team or the project, right? Yeah, that was just a comment.
No, and I appreciate that. You know, for everyone listening at home, I think the first part of this podcast, we really talked a lot about work-related things from an employee and a management kind of standpoint, and the conflicts between that, and facing failure, and kind of what you can identify to do to address those things, including time management and obviously allocation of resources, leveraging high impact versus low impact tasks, and really self-reflection. But one of the things I want to dive into is more personal, because I think that it really starts, my opinion is it starts from there. And then if you are okay in your personal life, a lot of that will trickle into your professional life, right? Okay. But it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't work the other way around. So you really have to make sure that your home front is okay and you are okay as a person. And then you can naturally gravitate some of those positive vibes towards like a workplace. So okay. Would you agree with that, Patrick? Or
yeah, for sure. And I was just thinking back to the things that I've been through, and I have never faced a situation where having a good standing work relationship translates into having a good standing personal relationship.
Right.
It's always the other way around for me as well. Yeah.
One of the things I think that people can really relate to is rejections in relationships, right? I think that's probably the universal thing that people can really gravitate towards. I think the first thing that people need to understand is failure, although the connotations around the word failure are so severe and so finite, like it's almost like with a capital F, like people are just emphasizing that, oh, you're a failure, like with an F. I think people need to take a step back and understand that failure is actually part of the journey. It's part of everyday life. It's part of what every single person is going to go through. Any celebrity, Instagram model, professional athlete, whomever you want to talk about, they've faced the exact same rejection and failure, maybe even more so than the normal person. Like going to auditions for roles for years while waiting tables at like a coffee shop before they get discovered, playing, I don't know, like warehouse worker number 4 or something like that in a movie as an extra for like 10 years before they get a speaking role, these kind of things. So I think it's important for everyone to understand that it's not just selective, that, hey, it happens to this person, but not to that person. It happens to everyone.
Indeed.
So normalizing that, I think, is really important.
That's for sure. You cannot escape rejection and failure, in my opinion. It's a natural process of your professional and personal development, because you do not come to this world already knowing everything that's going to happen first, and then you don't have all the knowledge and all the experience and expertise that you need in order to prevent those things, right?
Yeah, I think that's super, super important. I think with relationships, like personal relationships, whether it's be a boyfriend, girlfriend, or fiance, or a wife, or even your parents, you know. I think we always face some form of rejection or failure or feel like that. And I can speak to kind of my own experiences. I think for a long time I felt like that, you know, like a failure because of so many different rejections, because I would try things and I would quote unquote fail at them. And that would really cause me to have a downward spiral where it's almost like I'm probably pretty sure I used this analogy in another podcast, but it's like you start off as like I don't know, like a beautiful chiseled statue, and then your confidence just gets chipped away a little bit at a time, and then you slowly come down like this, right? So I get it, you know, for listeners out there that are kind of kicking stones and everything like that, I think Patrick and I can definitely tell you that we've been there. We still experience it to this day. I think everyone does. You're not alone.
Just made me remember a really, really deep moment that happened pretty much just 20 years, no, maybe 23 years ago when I was like 5. So every day, my mom and I, we had this routine that I would wash my teeth, I would brush my teeth, and I would go and run to her and show them to her and ask, how do they look? And she would say, they look like pearls of the sea, right? Because they are beautiful and shiny and white, right? So I just remember that this is amazing. You're pulling some strings in here, man. You're like, yeah. So I remember that the first time that I got like the first cavity, I went all the way to her, and I was happy, but I was innocent. I was not expecting rejection. And I asked her, and for the first time in my life, she didn't say that I had did as beautiful as pearls of the sea, right? So I don't know how to feel right now about that, because this is something that I'm processing as we speak. But I can certainly tell you that that's pretty much the first time that I experienced rejection, yeah, and failure, yeah.
Interesting. And you remember it to this day, even though it was 20 years ago, and to some people it might be like, what's a big deal? It's cavities, right? Like it's something that's probably stood with you for, at least you remember it up until now.
You know what I remember the most? I think that the reason why it had such an impact was because, again, this was a tradition already. It was not something recent that we started doing. No, we had been doing this for pretty much over a year, if I'm not mistaken, right? So just imagine, like every single day going to your mom, asking the same question, getting the same answer, which is something that nurtures you and fulfills you, right? Makes you feel great. And then boom, it just so happens that you don't get that same answer or the thing that you were expecting. It's more about that feeling rather than the act in itself. Yeah.
Very fascinating. How those things dredge up these memories, and it stays with you for so long, and it accumulates almost like mold or like a scab, you know. It just gets bigger, you know, it kind of just gets bigger and bigger as you claw at it, and more, and sometimes it doesn't go away really until you kind of address those things head on, and how those things make us feel even years and years after. I mean, listeners would know this if they tuned into the first episode of YouTube, but this YouTube channel was in the works for 10 years. Like I can confidently say that, like, maybe even more than 10 years now. Like I've had this idea, like even when YouTube first started off, and I was following some, I won't name them, but some original YouTubers, and there's this thing called YouTube where no one really knew about what it was, right? Was like, oh, that'd be cool to like have a channel, you know. And every single year that I would think about launching something, it would be every single excuse in the world, right? Like, now's not the right time. I'm too busy with my career. I don't have the right equipment. What are people gonna think of this? These ideas.
Yeah.
I'm not good on camera. Maybe I need to take some acting classes. Like, literally, just every single gambit of excuses in the book, in order to avoid the potential risk of failure. Right? I feel like almost all of it tied back to kind of rejection and failure as a whole, right? So I guess my point is, like, your mind's going to play a lot of tricks on you as to what it's going to make you think that you can and cannot do. And sometimes it's really important to block out a lot of that noise and just go do the thing. Does that make sense? Like, you're never really going to, like, discover yourself and what you're capable of unless you just go do it.
Indeed. And to top that on, to add on to that premise that you just mentioned, I think it's really important to always be aware of where you're coming from. I have seen multiple occasions and multiple scenarios where people are at a position of advantage or power over someone else or a group of people, and they usually forget they were at some point or another in their lives in a similar situation, right? So my point is that if you know what your worth is, it's more than likely that you will accept and you will embrace this rejection or failure with a positive mindset rather than letting that affect you down the line. Of course, this will depend a lot on, first, your emotional intelligence. Secondly, how mature you really are. And third, your current emotional state at that point when that thing happens, right? So there might be many different, more things that come into the equation, but I think those come to my mind, and those have been probably what have decided in my personal development and professional, what things affect me and what things do not. Make sense?
It does. And I think that, I'm not equating maturity to age, because I know a lot of people that are quite a bit older than me that act like complete buffoons. They act like they're 6 years old and their emotional quotient is really, really low. And then people that are half my age that act beyond their years. So I really think that it's a muscle just like anything else that you need to develop and go and kind of hone over time and experiences. But you also need to be open to accepting that as a part of your development. So I do think that a lot of times we get defensive by nature and start to blame every other element that's there. Just like I was blaming every other element during when I was thinking about doing the YouTube. Cool, I didn't have the right gear. I didn't have the right idea. I didn't know anything about video editing. I didn't know about this. I didn't know about that. Like, those are all a little bit of excuses, like that I have to call myself out on right now, because am I incapable of learning video editing? No, I'm not. Was there resources back then, and there are right now actually a ton of resources to learn video editing? Yes, there are. It's actually probably easier now than ever, really, to kind of get started and edit videos or do whatever, content and stuff like that.
Yes, and the reality is that sorry for interrupting, but
no, that's okay.
The reality is that there's people that are probably twice your age and they are
Yeah.
making YouTube videos.
Yes.
So then you ask yourself, what does it really come to? What do I need to have, or what needs to happen in order for me to be able to unlock this motivation or this sense of knowing that you are capable, right? Or this sense of capability. You were touching a couple of different points that are really important, but I consider that one of the most crucial things in any scenario really is your emotional intelligence. There's people, I know people that are way younger than I am, and they are probably more mature. It so comes to the point where the things and the situations and events on their lives and their personal lives shape them this way, and they are forced somehow to mature, right? They are forced to see things that they should probably not be seeing at this point, right? Such as hardships and death, even, right? And it really does depend on multiple factors, in my opinion, like how adaptive you are, how receptive you are as well of the things that are happening, and how aware you are that they are happening. As long as you have these three factors, in my opinion, you can then go ahead and say, okay, I understand the problem, I know where it's coming from, and I have these tools at my disposal. I have learned this, and that throughout my life, and maybe I can apply that to this problem. Maybe, right? If you have the expertise again, the maturity, and the emotional intelligence to do so. Otherwise, chances are that it's gonna be like my situation, and like, I mean, it just happened. What happened with my mom, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it just happened, but I was so young, I didn't know how to react, and it just happened. But now, 25 years later, 23 years later, sorry, I'm just remembered then. I'm wondering how deep this situation has ingrained itself into what I have become today. Right?
Yeah. It's true. I mean, I think if we don't tackle some of those issues head on, and it's not as easy as it sounds. Some of those are deep-seated issues that are going to stay with you for a long time unless you address them. I think the first thing is obviously identifying that it's there, you know, and you might not be able to make sense of all of it or really put a name to it until you see like a professional. But I do think that it's important that you say to yourself, hey, there's something wrong here. I probably need to get some help, or at least address it in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, no, I think that's 100% really, really good advice for people listening. It's very interesting to me, you know, we don't have too much time left on this podcast, but I wanted to mention something that I think is quite funny. So when people drink, you know, people say, oh, I wasn't myself because I was drunk or whatever. And yes, some of that is true. Like, it's a heightened probably sense of reality. But I also think that there's some merits for identifying that people are probably as honest as they'll ever be when they're inebriated. Yeah.
Yes,
because they've lost all of their inhibitions. They just don't give an F what other people think of them. They don't give an F what you or I think about them. They don't give an F what they look like in society. They're just going to do their thing. And they might be as raw or real as you'll ever see them. Do you know what I'm saying?
For sure. And the truth about this is that you forget about all of these social contexts that you might be involved in. all these values, all these principles that were imbued into you by your parents and
Hmm.
your teachers, right? So I find it funny as well because I mean I used to drink and I used to drink a lot,
Hmm.
maybe 2 3 years in the past.
Hmm.
You would have seen me like drunk and pretty much just like passed out because of drunkenness, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not proud of that, but I know how it feels, and I never want to feel the hangover again. It's such an awful feeling for such an experience that you could. Well, from what my doctor said, it's genetic. It comes to that point where
Yeah.
uh, people that have a certain gene
Hmm.
are able to control their hunches, or their how much alcohol they consume,
Hmm.
and people that don't, well, they pretty much cannot, right?
Right.
So they become alcoholic. You have this genetic predisposition to become an
Hmm.
alcoholic. Of course, that doesn't mean that you will obviously become an alcoholic, but you have that. And unfortunately, I didn't care, and I had too many things on my personal life that instead of seeking help again,
Hmm.
I decided to take the short route and pretty much just drown myself in alcohol
Right.
and try to solve my issues that way, which
Yeah.
obviously didn't help
No,
at all,
never.
right?
Yeah,
I
but I
felt
mean, from
worse
my
doing
experience and from other people that I've seen their
it.
experience, it's never cleared anything up or
Yeah,
solved anything.
it's awful, man. I really do not wish this upon anybody, but I still get messages from the people that used to drink with me
Yeah.
from time to time, and they are always like, "Hey, Patrick, let's go drink."
Right.
But you know what? The truth about all of this
Hmm.
is that people that like that, those are the people that actually lead you to failure
Yeah.
because they're not going to be there when you need them.
Yeah.
And I have seen this firsthand multiple times. I have given my trust, my expectations. I have good expectations and faith on them to these people, and every single time I have been let down and hurt even. So my point is, you really are alone in some things,
Yeah.
and you really have to figure them out on your own. Doesn't matter what people tell you. Doesn't matter how much um, you go to therapy or you
Hmm.
speak to your friends, your family. Everybody's gonna have a different opinion, and nobody else knows how you're feeling at the moment.
Yeah.
So, I can go deeper into this, and I would love to. By the way, I think this makes up for a second episode, and I would
Yeah.
definitely welcome the opportunity. But my point, just real quick to make a long story short, is that when you tap into this understanding that nobody else is going to save you or uh, fix your life, that's when things really start to change. Or at least you start to open your mind to seeing things differently and to understanding that the reason why you're causing so much harm and that is translating into failure in your life is everything that you do.
I think accepting a level of responsibility for your actions and the outcomes that you have faced and the results that you faced or the results that you didn't want is a really important step to understanding yourself a lot better and like how you can progress from there. Because if you constantly think, oh, like the government had it out for me, society had it out for me, why did that person crash into my car, why did this happen, why did that happen, like you can just go on for days, like why did it rain today, kind of thing. Like, you can just say anything, right? um but what you can control is what you can control, your sphere of influence around you. i, I think what I would say, and I think this is actually a topic maybe for another podcast down the road, which I think you touch on. um, your environment around you and the people that you surround yourself with. I think that often when I was young, I really did not understand the kind of impact that had on me and the influence that it had on me, or maybe a subliminal influence that it had on me, that wasn't even, like, hey, I didn't even know what was going on until it was kind of like too late. And I think that happens to a lot of people. It really does. So you really have to be careful about a lot of that. We talked a lot about, like, we had an episode about toxic workplaces. I talked about toxic friends and flaky friends, and that kind of all ties into that. We could do really like a whole podcast about that, but you are a product of your environment, right? You are a product of the people that you hang around with, and whether or not they're positive influences on you or negative influences on you. And so what I would probably say to listeners, and hopefully you would agree with me on this, is if you're stuck in a spot right now, I think you really need to reassess the people around you and the environment that you're in right now. I think that's low-hanging fruit that you can really think about. Does this person deserve to belong in my life? Are they doing more harm than good? Are they net positive or net negative? Yeah.
You're tapping into something so personal to me that I would love to talk more about it. That I think that deserves an episode in and of itself.
In and of itself, yeah.
Yes, for sure. But I just want to say something, just final note. I have met people that hang around, let's say quote unquote, like the people that are bad, how do you say, like bad influence, bad influence for them. And they don't get affected by that, apparently, right? I think there's a certain limit or a certain threshold that you have to surpass in order to allow yourself to be influenced completely by someone or a group of people. So at the end of the day, the people that you surround yourself with, they will carry an energy and a purpose and a set of interests that you probably do have. But if you do not, or if your interests are changing, then you definitely need to start reassessing your current friendships, your current whatever, right?
Your current position and your situation. Yeah. No, I completely agree.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to make that point. Honestly, this has been one of the most sincere podcasts that we have had. I know that the tonality is a little bit, darker probably, but I think this allows us to be super transparent and super open, and obviously talk with the hands in our heart and be honest, right?
I think that's a great thing, and I think listeners and watchers will appreciate that transparency. It's really important that the audience at home, they understand that this is all authentic. We're talking about from real experiences that we've been through or are even going through right now. And that's the whole point really of this channel. I'm no different than you guys, like you guys are experiencing the same thing, or everyone at home is experiencing the same thing as myself. We've all been through it in some way, shape, or form. Let's try to figure it out together, right? So I think that's really important that we recognize that. Patrick, I do want to thank you for your time and hopping on the podcast with me. I really do appreciate it. I think this was a really good one, and I think a lot of people can recognize a lot of maybe faults within themselves that they can
fix. For sure. Honestly, I just want to invite everybody to leave their comments, and if they have any questions as well, they can reach out to us through the comment section. Jeffrey, from my end, this has been a blast, honestly. Nothing but blast, and I'm always surrounded by this feeling of warmth when I'm invited to this podcast. So thank you for that. Thank you for having me, and if you need me to be here, I'm in, man. You can count on me.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for listening and watching, guys. If you're catching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe, ring that notification bell. We want to hear from you about the topic today. What's kind of affected you, and did you find this advice useful? If you're listening to us on Amazon Music, iTunes, or Spotify, that's fantastic. You can find new episodes published every week on Wednesdays. That's our podcast days. And please write in any questions that you have. We do have a Q&A face-to-face session every other Friday. We look forward to answering your questions. Again, we're trying to change the world one click at a time. We can't do that without you. So please share this information to whoever, your family and friends, your loved ones that you feel could benefit from this. Again, thank you so much for listening, and TRG out. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.